Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on what time zone you might be in. It just clicked over to noon for me here in the Central Time Zone. Today we're going to be talking about MRF operations. Are you focused on the right things? So if you joined us last week, we talked about sort of a high-level view of MRFs and MRF operations and talked about contamination. So today we're going to drill down a little bit deeper into that topic. My name is Sarah Bolton. I am the new business development manager here at Blue Ridge Services, and I am also the webinar moderator today. So you can always email me, Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, at blueridgeservices.com if you have any questions during the webinar or after. I'm always available via email. So just a couple of quick technical items before we get started. So when you logged in, you probably saw this GoToWebinar control panel. And if you don't see the full control panel as it appears here, you can click the little orange arrow and it should expand out your full control panel. So just a couple of things to be aware of. You are either using your computer's audio or you're calling in through your phone to access the audio. Just make sure that you've checked the correct option based on what you're using. So we really like for our presentations to be interactive, and we absolutely love to get questions from you guys. It's really interesting to see, where the group is at and what you guys are thinking about, what issues, what challenges you're facing. So please send those questions in. You can start sending them in at any point during the presentation, and I will keep track of them and we'll save time at the end to go over those. I will also be sending out a full recording of the presentation today. So if you want to watch it again or share with a colleague, you will have the option to do that. So look for that in the next day or so after the webinar. This is for anybody who might be having audio issues. You can always send me a chat or you can send it through the questions tab and I can try to help you get set up. And then if you see a timer in the middle of your screen, you can just click and drag it out of the way. Sometimes it pops up, sometimes it doesn't, but I like to just let you know how to get that out of your way if it's kind of blocking the screen. So we are going to be at WasteCon next month in Phoenix. WasteCon is October 21st through 24th, and we will be there. Several members of our team will be there. So if you guys are going to be there, we would love to see you. We're going to be at booth 433, and Neil Bolton and Troy Keckley, who are Neil is our president and presenter today. And Troy Keckley does a lot of our fill sequence plans and soil management plans, and they're going to be presenting some sessions at our booth. And then on Tuesday, October 22nd, Kasem Cornelius, who is our safety consultant here at Blue Ridge, is going to be talking about implementing a comprehensive safety program, and he's going to be diving into a case study with one of our clients on standard operating procedures. And that's going to be an interactive session that there'll be some activities that you can do to participate with that. So I highly recommend checking that session out. And hopefully you can stop by to see us at WasteCon. All right, so I'm going to turn things over to Neil Bolton, who is our presenter for today. So give us just a second to sort of make that transition.
Okay.
And Neil, are you on?
Yes, I am. Should hear me loud and clear, and you should see my screen here in just a moment.
Okay.
And let me know when you do.
I can see your screen.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk a little bit more detail about some MRF operations, and we're going to specifically get into the topic of focusing on the right commodities. And we're not going to tell you any hot tips right now to that OCC is going to be the next hot commodity, go for cardboard. But we're going to talk about how you could make those kinds of decisions in your day-to-day process. So again, Sarah's our organizer. My name is Neil Bolton. I've been in the business 42 years and have worked on MRFs for a long time. First involvement, excuse me, was a project manager for a recycling facility renovation in 1984. That's been a few years ago. So a lot has changed in the industry since then, but a lot has remained the same. Also presenting today, Jake Lethin. I'll let Jake give his bio when his section of this presentation comes up. But Jake will be talking about benchmarks, metrics, and some performance tracking concepts that you can apply to your MRF operation. So we're going to first talk about setting goals. The recycling business is very broad. You know, you can say you're in recycling, but you might be running a buyback center, you may be managing a MRF, you might be working on a pick line, you may be running a compost operation, or maybe some metal recovery scrapyard system. So the process is complex, very complicated, much more than people think. People think recycling is just putting cans in a bin and that's it. There's a lot more to that. And I think one of the questions is, how's that going for you? And it's a tough industry right now. A lot of facilities are struggling. A lot of people in the business are struggling to try to understand what's going on. It's very, very important. It's foundational that you understand what your goal is. What's the big picture? What are we doing out there, and why are we doing it? In terms of diversion, you can recycle just about anything if you put enough money and effort into it. But are you doing too much or too little? Does your effort apply to your demographics and your community? And really, get down to it, what are your goals? So we're going to talk about these things today. I'm just going to skip through this pretty quick. This is just kind of agenda type information. We're going to start with a poll question. We have 4 poll questions here today, and this allows us to see who in our audience is dealing with what issues. And I'm going to go ahead and read this to you. Sarah will present that in just a minute. First poll question: what are your diversion goals primarily based on? Number 1, social, political, or regulatory mandate. Number 2, maximizing diversion above all else. Number 3, having a financially sound system. That means positive cash flow. If you were a private business, you'd be profitable. Or number 4, tradition. This is just the way we've always done recycling. So again, the question is, what are your diversion goals primarily based on? Number 1, social, political, or regulatory mandate. Number 2, maximizing diversion above all else. Number 3, having a financially sound system. Or number 4, tradition.
Okay, great. So I already see that lots of you have jumped in on this. And just to let you know, if you haven't done polls with us before, it's totally anonymous, so nobody will get to see your answer. But it is kind of fun to get an idea of where our group is at today. So if you are able to participate, please do so. And for anybody that jumped on a few minutes late, no worries. We're going to be sending out the full recording of today's webinar, so you will get that if you need to backtrack and watch the beginning. All right, I'm going to give just a couple more seconds here. I still see a few answers coming in, so now is your chance to jump in on this. All right, I'm going to close it out and share the results. So today, 23 of us say that our diversion goals are primarily based on social, political, or regulatory mandate. 8% are focused on maximizing diversion above all else. 62%, so a large majority, are focused on having a financially sound system. And then 8% are just basing their goals on tradition, how they've always done it.
Okay, this is pretty telling, and it's not unusual. This is pretty typical that most facilities today recognize that they have to operate like a business. They have to be able to generate some revenue, positive cash flow. Otherwise, the recycling program is subsidized by some other part of their organization. And historically, folks didn't talk about this. It was the emperor's new clothes, and you were supposed to think about diversion above all else. But more and more people have been able to put on the table that recycling doesn't always make money. In fact, sometimes it can lose money and have to be subsidized. So there's an increasing focus and an increasing transparency in the industry that we have to make money. And so 23% plus 8%, so about a third of us today are focused on diversion because they have to be, or for whatever reason, that diversion is a big focus. The rest, about 2/3 of us, a little more than 2/3, are either doing it to make money or doing it because that's just the way that we've always done it. And so what we're going to be talking about today are some of the efficiencies that will help you figure out how to meet your goals, whatever those might be. And that comes down to defining what your system is. So you have a system and you need a system, but is the system that you have actually the one that you need? So there were many MRFs, many recycling facilities built across the country, across North America. because that was the thing to do. So we had to have a system, so we went out and we built one. And oftentimes, not maybe the majority of times, but often enough that it was a problem, those systems were built without clear goals being established. We just knew we needed a MRF and we're going to recycle a bunch of stuff and let's get on with it. Your goals define the commodities that you should be going after. Your system must be designed and operated to go after those commodities. So again, it's back to the goals. You want to make money? Do you want to achieve maximum diversion? Are you trying to satisfy some social or regulatory mandates or legislation? But you have to know the goals, because that tells you what commodities you go after, and that in turn tells you what kind of a system you need to have in place. Just don't build a MRF. You could spend tens of millions of dollars to build an incredible MRF, and the consultant that builds it would love it because they'll make 10% off of that cost. 10% of the project is probably design and construction management fees. That's great. Build an $80 million MRF and your designer is going to get $8 million. They'll love that. But make sure you have your goals in place first so that you're actually controlling the system so that you end up with the system that you want. So what are you targeting? You're going after newspaper or cardboard or glass or metals or wood, or are you trying to compost some material, or what are you trying to do, and why are you trying to do that? We have done a very, very effective job as an industry in marketing the concept of recycling and making it appear that that is the end-all, solve-all of the waste industry, and that's just not necessarily the truth. And so the jazzy things that we recycle are beverage containers and things like that folks have their hands on, so the public knows what that is, they feel it, they get it. But those commodities may not be the ones that you need to go after. What we find is often the beverage containers, plastics, aluminum, if you have some kind of a deposit, a CRV for those materials, some states have that, where you buy a beverage and you're going to pay a certain amount of money just as a deposit on that container, and then recycling facilities get some of that money back from whatever state they happen to be in. That extra money can help make that work. But if you have to just sell the commodities on the market, you're out there, dog eat dog in business, that can be a little more difficult. But really, the bottom line, it's all based on your goals. That tells you which commodities you're going after. Here's where we're going to start in this process of defining that. We're going to look at productivity goals. Once you've identified specifically what it is you're trying to divert, you need to set goals for productivity. So let's suppose that you've conducted a waste stream characterization of material in your community, and you've come up with the classic pie chart, and it tells you how much plastic and how much aluminum and how much wood and how much different types of materials are there, and you need to go after those. You'll need to establish productivity goals, because let's suppose that let's suppose that 8% of your waste stream right now at a dirty MRF is plastics. Can you get all 8%? Probably not. Maybe you'll get 6%. Maybe you'll get 5%. To get the full 8% is so difficult, because you're going to have to reach into other bags and other containers and find containers that have been crushed or flattened that are still filled with liquid. It becomes progressively more difficult as you try to get more and more of a certain type of commodity. But again, you need to know what those are so you can set productivity goals. Again, what are those goals? Is it to maximize diversion? Is it to maximize revenue? Oftentimes, it's kind of a blend where you want to divert as much as you can. There may be some legislative or state mandate that you divert a specific percentage of materials. So you have to meet that, and in the process, you still want to be as cost-effective as possible, as profitable as you can be. So that will also dictate which commodities you go after. Some are much more profitable or easy to get to, lower cost extraction than others. So let's suppose that we wanted to maximize diversion. I'm sorry this is not super clear, but this is a chart that shows how much diversion is available for these different types of commodities. So if we're trying to maximize diversion, forget costs, forget revenue, we're trying to divert as much as possible. We're going to go for the things that represent the most potential diversion. We're going to go after the cover material. We're going to go after tires and green waste and wood waste and scrap metal. we're going to go after newspaper, and we're going to go after cardboard. If we want to maximize diversion, we need to focus on those commodities in the waste stream that represent the most tonnage, because that's where we're going to get the most diversion. On the other hand, if we want to focus on revenue, we want to make revenue our primary goal, then we need to focus on things that are going to generate the most revenue for us. That may be scrap metal and newspaper and cardboard. Now, there's another thing that comes into play here, and that is the extraction cost. We're talking about how much we divert. We're talking about revenue, but there is a cost to be able to extract these different commodities. We'll come to that in a little bit. Here's a chart we conducted at MRF, and it shows it's a pickline analysis. We did a bunch of time motion studies, video analysis, many hours on site gathering data, and even more hours analyzing that. And we were able to identify on the main part of this table here, for example, item number 1, cardboard bales, how many pounds we diverted, or how many tons, 143 tons diverted, what percent diversion that equated to, and how many picks were required to get that. So essentially, we did a study and we evaluated how many picks, that's manual grabs off the pick line by your laborers, how many picks to extract certain types of material, how many pounds per pick on average, and what we were able to generate with that. So from that information, we can then calculate costs of extracting these commodities. We can look at the revenue that they generate and also the amount of diversion that they generate. And so we were able to go through there and eliminate what we call some of the loser materials and things that really just didn't make a lot of sense, and a lot of the plastics and some of the glass and things like that that just weren't really paying their way in terms of high cost to extract, low revenue generation on the back end. And in the end, we were able to decrease the labor costs by 35% at this facility and sacrifice 28 tons of diversion, about 3%. So our diversion numbers went down 3%, but our labor costs went down 35% by focusing on what we call the winner type commodities, the ones that generated revenue for the least amount of extraction costs. So part of the solution to this comes down to, for example, optimizing the pick line. You know, how much target material crosses the belt per day, and what's the cost and the benefit to obtain it. So it's there, it's in your facility, but you got to get it out. You got to be able to pull it out of that waste stream or that single stream, recyclables, whatever form that's coming into your facility in. You need to pull it out for the least cost, and it needs to be material that's going to make a difference in terms of diversion or revenue. So is there a better process? Should you slow the belt speed? Should you increase the belt speed? Should you manually open the bags? Do you need a mechanical bag opener so you can do that? Make sure you're pulling the bulky items first. Normally on a pick line, we'll have folks pulling cardboard and big items first, because that generates a lot of weight, and it also clears the line so subsequent pickers can see what's on the belt. We'll talk more about the whole issue of cardboard in a MRF here in just a few minutes. And then the ergonomics and the pick time and all of that sort of thing. There is a point of diminishing return where you've picked it about as clean as you should, and it's time to stop picking on that material because you've high graded most of what you can. This takes us to the next poll question. This is a very, very important question, and it's one of the things that we see most MRF operators do not know. The question is, do you know the cost of each step in your diversion process? Number 1, yes, definitely. Number 2, we know some of them. Or number 3, we do not know the detailed cost of our system. And I'm talking about the cost of the floor sort, the conveyor, the initial pick line, the secondary pick line, etc. Do you know the cost of each step in your diversion process? Number 1, yes, definitely. Number 2, we know some of them. Or number 3, we do not know the detailed cost of our system.
Okay, great. So I already see lots of you guys jumping in on this. And just to remind you, it's completely anonymous. Nobody will see your answer. And don't forget, you can start sending questions over as they come up. You can just use your questions tab on your go-to webinar control panel, and I will keep track of those, and we will take some time at the end of the presentation to go over those. I'm going to give just a few more seconds here because I still see some answers coming in. So if you want to jump in on this poll, go ahead and get your answer logged in. And for anybody that came in late, we will be sending out a full recording of the webinar. So if you missed the first part, no worries, you'll have access to that. All right, I'm going to close this out and share our results. So we have 9% say yes, definitely. They know the cost of each step in the diversion process. 64% say that they know some of them, and 27% say we do not know the detailed cost of our system.
Okay, so again, pretty telling information. 10%, less than 10% of our group here today actually know all their costs, so they can make decisions about which commodities are making money and which commodities are not making money. It's not just a matter of how much revenue you generate at the end of the month when you sell your baled material. It's how much did it cost to extract that material. You've got to know your costs. Peter Drucker, probably the most famous business management consultant ever, said you can't manage what you don't measure. If you don't know your costs, you can't make those critical management decisions. And so good for the 9% that know their costs, good job. And also for the 64%, the 2/3 who know some of their costs, you've got some more work to do. The 27%, you've got a lot more work to do, because you can't make these critical decisions about streamlining, making more efficient your MRF if you don't know where your costs are. You just have to know that. It's just bottom line. So here's something about that point of diminishing return. If you're a fisherman, you know that if you show up at the fishing hole first thing in the morning, you might have better luck than if you wait until there are 10 other people standing around there fishing for the same fish. Same thing happens on a pick line. The first 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 pickers get the high grade stuff. They get the good stuff. There's plenty to choose from, and they can move quickly and effectively. But as we add more and more pickers, the fish kind of thin out, so to speak, and it's a little more difficult to make your numbers. And so just be aware that the answer is not always just adding more people to your pick line, not filling up every station on the pick line, because the overall average production of those folks will probably decrease. So you need to balance that out to find the most effective staffing, not just the most staffing. And then target your high-grade loads. I was at a dirty MRF one time, and it was located adjacent to a landfill, and they brought loads into the MRF until the MRF floor was filled. So they brought trash loads into this dirty MRF, dumped it on the floor until the floor was filled, and that would probably be 5 or 6 loads on the ground. And then every other load would go straight to the landfill until there was more capacity. So they weren't MRFing, so to speak, every load that came in, only what the floor could handle, the floor of the MRF could handle. And so they would dump some really crummy loads in there with lots of trash, lots of contamination, and very little good recyclable material, because they would just happen to be the first loads to show up. And then they'd have high-grade loads, maybe front loaders from a commercial route, that would come in there, and they'd bypass the MRF and go straight to the landfill. So you have to high-grade your loads. And if you don't know the answer, I can tell you that the folks that are working on the floor will know the answer in terms of which loads, which routes, which customers generally tend to have the better loads and which have the poorer loads, or the less recyclable content loads. And so you've got to be able to focus on good material. Gold miners, some of them did very well, but they didn't do well just going out and mining gravel if there's no gold in it. They had to find the vein, and they had to high grade that material to get the good stuff. You need to do the same thing at your MRF. Material flow is really the key. Doing things right and doing the right things, but the flow along the line is critical. Not just the number of people, but what's the flow rate, and are you matching that to the material on the belt, and are you matching that to the commodities that you're expecting your crew to pull off the belt? Here's another bit of data. This is a screenshot, so it's not very clean, but what it shows is that as the tons increase, so the blue line at the top shows how tonnage changed coming into a dirty MRF. Tonnage increased starting in April, dipped a little bit in May, but June, July, August, September, the tonnage was higher than average. But we look at the diversion down below, and it didn't mirror that. More tonnage came in, diversion in some cases actually dropped. That is that same fishing scenario that we just talked about. Sometimes you have too much material, it can bog down the system, and you just can't get to the good stuff. And so again, this phenomenon tells me that they needed to do a better job of high grading specific loads and focusing on the good stuff to the extent they could. Here's some other factors that contribute to sometimes an increase in raw tonnage feedstock coming in and a decrease actually in diversion. Is there limited floor space? As you bring more and more tonnage in, do you have less and less room to perform a floor sort? Are you crowded? Are you targeting the wrong loads? So we look at this picture right here. We see some cardboard right up front. There's some pieces of cardboard in that pile. Now, if they have an effective floor sort, somebody's going to pull those big pieces of cardboard out. Well, they're easy to get to, because otherwise they're going to go up that incline conveyor across the pick lines, and they're going to cover everything. We're going to have to pull that cardboard out later anyway, but we'll waste pick stations trying to remove cardboard that's hiding other materials. So as we'll find here in a bit, we're going to talk more about this. An effective floor sort and having plenty of room to do a good floor sort is really critical, and it's a missing link for many MRF operations. We're also going to talk about process improvement, and we're big on this. In fact, I think at the end we can give you some information on downloading a book on process improvement for waste operations, something that we wrote a couple years ago. Process improvement is essentially the process of going through your operations and dialing it in, making it as efficient as it can be, whatever that is, whatever your goals are, helping you achieve those goals. So we use analytical tools like Lean or Six Sigma or activity sampling and value stream mapping. I'm going to give you just a quick rundown on what these tools are. So Lean is the goal, is the process of producing the end result, producing value in your system with the least amount of work. So there's no wasted effort. Basically, we're just not wasting our time doing things that don't matter. We're focused on doing the things that matter. Six Sigma, on the other hand, is an analytical process improvement tool that focuses on eliminating mistakes. Now, you can look at this and see, hey, this is a pretty clean looking system. There's a single pick line up on top. Folks are dropping things down into those cages. Cardboard is spilling out. That's all great. But if they don't clear that cardboard up before they open the bin next to it, which seems to have some maybe newspaper in there or mixed paper, they're going to end up cross-contaminating that. That is a mistake, and that's the kind of stuff that Six Sigma looks for to try to eliminate mistakes. If you have to rerun material, if you have to re-clean material, or rerun and do a negative pick after your first pass, those are mistakes. If you end up with a lot of contamination in your final product, that's a result of some mistakes in your system. Six Sigma works to eliminate that. Cross-contamination, for example, is a problem. It's costly, and it's generally avoidable. Time motion studies. This is just a wide range of different tools that we'll use, where we'll set up video cameras and watch for variation, identify what folks are doing and how efficient they are at doing that. Let me step back to this. Sometimes we've been at some MRFs where people will go out, manager might go out with a stopwatch and say, okay, I'm going to time and see how many picks per minute you guys are achieving. Well, what's going to happen when you make that announcement? Everybody's going to shift into high gear and they're going to pick really fast. For that minute you're standing there with a stopwatch, that doesn't tell you anything. We generally set up cameras and leave them on for hours or days so we can pick an average, typical pick rate. So how long does it take? What does the process take? So what's the process timeline for 1 ton of cardboard to go through your system? Down at the bottom, you know, a mixed load of recyclables gets dumped. There's some floor sorting that happens. It's pushed to an incline conveyor. It enters the pick line. It's extracted by the pickers and stored in a cage, et cetera, et cetera. The process, how long does that take, and how much does it cost to extract 1 ton of cardboard? And if you don't know those costs, and what we found out is that 91% of us today don't know all of those costs, about a third of us or so don't know any of them, we can't make good decisions about is cardboard making money for us or is it not? And how could we streamline that operation? We've got to know the process. We've got to know the production rates. We've got to know costs. Activity sampling takes a number of snapshots of an individual activity and then comes up with what is that person, that machine, that piece of equipment spending its time doing? What is it doing? Let's just see through something that looks very, very busy to see how effective they are. And a time study is just often done either on the ground manually watching the operation or it's done with video. We think that video is best because it lets them, the folks who are measuring that data, be in an office setting, not distracted, and it also lets workers work sort of normally without somebody standing there with a stopwatch. So here's an example, just a typical example of someone pulling cardboard off the pick line, and we can see, if you watch them for a minute, you might say, wow, they're busy. They're just busy, busy, busy. But when you watch what they're actually doing and you break that time out, you find out that they're spending some time unplugging the conveyor. There's some break time. They're emptying the cans next to them. They're waiting. They're talking to folks. And they're busy, but they may not be as busy with their primary task as it might first appear. So activity sampling helps us identify what's actually going on out there. And then we might do other types of video analysis. Here are a couple of examples, or an example that shows what's the cycle time for a forklift. So the forklift going into the MRF, picking up recyclables, taking it out, maybe taking bins to the baler or taking bale materials out to a storage building or stored outside. What are the cycle times? It's the same pattern. And when we see two peaks like this, we're looking for a bell curve. When we see two, that indicates we've either got two different operators or two different forklifts or maybe some different commodities, but there's some variation in here, and we can learn a lot from these different types of video analysis. Here's a tip to keep in mind. Anytime you see a lot of variation in the number of tons you extract of a certain commodity per day, or the number of picks, or the number of anything that you're measuring, when you see variation, that generally indicates some inefficiency. There's a problem. There's some poorly communicated procedures. Anyway, that variability almost always is a red flag to us that there's some inefficiency going on there. And then time-lapse filming. I'm not going to show you a video. I don't have the bandwidth to do that. But time-lapse filming lets us step back and see movement, basically fast forward on your VCR to see what's happening with folks. And you can see, again, in real time, just watching, you might see folks busy, 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 and everything looks great. You speed it up, time-lapse filming, oftentimes you can see inefficiencies because that random movement of the loader may stand out more when you fast forward, or workers segregating or congregating in different areas, doing different things. Anyway, that's just another tool that we might use. Value stream mapping lets us look at what is actually happening, what are the tasks and steps we're actually performing, and what are the steps that we just really need to perform. So for example, we could look at a MRF focusing on cardboard, and we could have a whole bunch of steps. In this case, we've got 17 steps between the time the truck arrives at the MRF and the time that cardboard is baled. And some of those are what we call non-value added. They're just wasted steps. And so here's an example. There's an unloading area. We have cages where the cardboard's being stored underneath the pick line. So the material's unloaded bottom left at the unloading area. There's some floor sort operation. Material goes up an incline conveyor across the first stations. People are pulling the big cardboard off to try to increase visibility for the subsequent pickers. And then it goes across the main pick line, and we're pulling cardboard at all these times. Now, that is what we're currently doing. Ideally, we would want to just eliminate some of those things. So rather than pulling cardboard from several different locations and allowing it to basically plug up the pick line system, let's put more effort into a floor sort so we can get it extracted before it gets into the system. This is my little Photoshop artwork here. You might be impressed with this. Here's some single stream recyclables at a MRF in a big pile, and there's a load of cardboard that got dumped. And regularly we'll see something like this where all commercial loads come into the MRF, they get dumped on the floor, and that means single stream recyclables from your blue bin on the curb, those trucks, those residential trucks coming in and dumping, you've got mixed recyclables there. And then here comes a front loader with a load of cardboard from a box store, and he backs in and he dumps that load on the floor. And instead of it being separated out right there with a good effective floor sort, because there's not enough room, the loader just shoves that up on a pile. And now that beautiful 6-ton load of cardboard has to be pulled one piece at a time on your pick line. Very, very inefficient. You need to know your flow. You need to know your costs so that you can identify these kinds of inefficiencies. Very common for this stuff to happen. A floor sort is a critical part of efficiency for any MRF. This just shows kind of things streamlined where we're eliminating some of those extra non-value added activities and just getting right to it. We want cardboard, we want to get it pulled out, sent to the baler, and baled as soon as possible. Finally, the theory of constraints. We're talking about bottlenecks in the system. At every facility, your material flows through some series of processes. And every process, whether it's a floor sort, incline conveyor, initial pick line, secondary pick line, shaker, whatever you have going on up there, there are production rates for each step in the process, and some of those will actually be bottlenecks because they can't effectively handle all of the flow. So think of your MRF as a pipeline. This same concept applies to a landfill, it applies to a compost operation, it applies to a transfer station. It's like a pipeline. Each step in the process has its own flow rate, its own production rate, and its corresponding cost. And that was the question we were asking before was, do you know the detailed cost of each step in your process? Because only then can you really dial in the process. So you want to check the flow at every step. That's based on a floor sort, transporting material, a pick line, whatever you're doing, you want to understand the flow and the cost of that material. Constraints are not all bad. You will always have a constraint. There will always be some point in the process, sometimes more than one step in the process, that is sort of a bottleneck, but you can work with that. Sometimes if the bottleneck is not creating problems upstream or downstream, it's okay. It's not worth the cost to change it. Sometimes it is a limiting factor and you have to modify it. So understanding each step and how it corresponds and interrelates to the other steps, very, very important. There's kind of a graphic flow that shows here's, kind of the unloading area. Here's a manual floor sort. Here we're transporting material. Now some of this stuff is actually going up a pick line. But it shows a bottleneck. It shows here that our floor sort is a bottleneck, 17.8 tons per hour. And we have to identify, is that crowding the rest of the system or is that okay? And if it is crowding it, what can we do to alleviate that particular bottleneck? And if we expand the flow of this floor sort here, something else will then emerge as the next priority bottleneck. And we'll have to decide whether to deal with that or not. This takes us to poll question number 3. As you're going through and doing all this work and analyzing this stuff, you got to be able to track your performance. So the question is, what detailed metrics or performance tracking do you use for your diversion process? Number 1, we have no detailed metrics. Number 2, we have 1 or 2 general metrics. Number 3, we track several performance metrics. Or number 4, we have a robust tracking system. So again, we're talking about how you're able to monitor individual commodities at specific steps. Are you tracking that stuff? Again, the question, what detailed metrics or performance tracking metrics do you use for your diversion process? Number 1, we have no detailed metrics. Number 2, we have 1 or 2 general metrics. Number 3, we track several performance metrics. Or number 4, we have a robust tracking system. And we're talking about tons per hour, picks per hour, et cetera. Those kind of performance tracking systems. What have you got out there?
All right. So lots of answers coming in. You guys are getting real experienced at this. You know what you're doing. I'll give a few more seconds just if you need to think through this or take your time answering this question. And just to remind everybody to start sending those questions in so we can go over those at the end of the presentation. I'll give just a couple more seconds in case anybody else wants to jump in before I close it out. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this one out and share our results. So today, 50% of us have 1 or 2 general metrics, 42% track several performance metrics, and 8% have a robust tracking system.
Okay, well, it's interesting that we have less than 10% with a robust tracking system. We had less than 10% that actually knew the cost of each step in their diversion process. I assume that's probably the same group that has they know their individual process step costs, and they have a robust tracking system. And the rest of us, more than 90%, are tracking several metrics, good, or 1 or 2 general metrics, which is better than none. But again, there are a lot of cost considerations and a lot of other decisions that you have to make day to day. And the more data you have, the better decisions you can make. And so as we go through this whole process of tracking performance metrics, I'll just say that generally, and based on our poll here today as well, we track lots of metrics. Number one metric is money. We've got to be able to pay for the system. We've got to be able to, if not generate a profit, we've got to break even, or we've got to cover most of our costs. Otherwise, there's a lot of subsidy that has to happen and go into our recycling program. Generally, it's going to be the money. When we talk about metrics, it's going to be related to productivity and money, and out of that is going to come your diversion numbers, which are important, but it takes money to run the show. So here's an important note. Despite the fact that improving your efficiency will save money, improving your efficiency will generally also make your facility safer, because in the process of improving efficiency, we have to understand the system first, and then we set specific standard operating procedures. Here's how we do this. We do a floor sort on these particular loads. Here's how we do the floor sort. And we do that the same way every time. And as you standardize those processes, you become more efficient, you save money, but it also helps your crew to understand better the entire process for your MRF, and it makes things safer for them. So we're going to shift gears and talk about specifically performance tracking, profit, tonnage, dashboard issues, and I'm going to kick this over to Jake, and I'll advance the slides. Jake, just let me know when you want to go to the next one, and I'll walk through it with you.
All right, thanks, Neil. Good day, everyone. My name is Jake Lethin. I have a background in operations and project management with the Marine Corps and General Electric. And here at Blue Ridge, I focus on organics operations and MRFs and how we can help optimize those operations. So today we'll kind of be talking about those performance tracking metrics and how we can use that to optimize our process. So as Neil mentioned, there's a few different metrics within the system, and it's very important to optimization to be able to measure and monitor the performance of your MRF. That'll allow for the optimization of costs and profits as well as diversion. Next slide. So as Neil kind of hinted at, each stage in the process is going to have a cost associated per the ton of output that can be measured. So not only is that going to give you a cost per ton for your individual processes inside your operation, but at the end, that will allow you to come up with a cost per ton of your end commodity, be that PET, OCC, aluminum, whatever it is that you're producing as your end goal. Next slide. Once you've developed those cost per tons for those commodities as a whole, you can start comparing that to the cost of the expected sale price of your commodities. We all know how much these sale prices really shift in a variable market. I mean, 5-10 years ago, you may have been getting paid for something that right now you are paying to get rid of. So it's important to measure this and compare it to the cost that it's taking for you to produce that commodity. Next slide. Once we start developing our map of where in the processes we have these costs per ton, we could start looking at optimization. If our goal is to maximize the profit of our operation, we can develop a model that allows us to adjust those operations so that you are maximizing the profit, whether that be by focusing on pulling out one commodity, or adjusting your processes, or getting rid of a process completely. If you set that end goal that you are going to maximize profit, and we know the measurements that we're looking at of cost per ton, we can use models to be able to adjust your process to really focus on that. Next slide. And the same goes for diversion. If our goal is diversion, a lot of times you have a set cost that you can incur. That's, basically your budget for operation. And if you want to know how much you can divert, within your budget. Once we've established those costs at all the processes, we can develop a model where you're focusing on diversion within your budget, and you're able to maximize that. Next slide. So when we talk about breaking down these processes and looking at the measurement, it's very important to really break out your process as a whole and look at where material is going and those metrics that we measure and monitor within the process. The next page, next slide. So this is just sort of a real simple breakdown. I know a lot of MRFs will have a much more complicated process than this, but this is just sort of gives you a good outlook of how material is flowing through your facility. And so each one of these boxes is your process, and we can, after thorough analysis, assign a cost per ton for each of these processes, as well as a production rate of tons per hour. And you could see, sorry, go back one slide. And so you could see for our end commodities there, we want to have that measurement of tons per hour of production total, as well as our cost per ton total, and then our sale price per total. And these are the metrics we want to look at that really allow us to start comparing to each other and looking at how your process is performing. Next slide. So when we're looking at cost per ton, tons per hour, and sale price per ton, we can start doing those calculations. We can look at the profit we're making, and we can look at long-term and the history of this, and we want to be able to record and track these metrics. Next slide. So as I said before, you'll have to do some thorough analysis to be able to come up with that production cost at each stage in the process. Once you've set that, for a good while, that'll kind of hold, and then what'll be changing is your output tons. So your cost per ton will be variable based on how many tons you're producing. You might be able to, in real time, kind of adjust that based off of your employees or how many hours you're operating. But really, when you're looking at long-term tracking the performance of your metrics, your adjustments on the fly and in real time are going to be the tons produced. Next slide. So we want to make sure that all organizations should be tracking and monitoring these metrics. Somewhere like Amazon, when they run their warehouses, they have measurements and metrics set at every stage of their process, and that's how they're able to do what they do with very slim margins, but they're able to scale that up in a way that allows them to make the kind of profits they see. But they needle down to a very small degree on being able to track their measurements, and they constantly monitor those metrics. These measurements will allow us to kind of set a baseline, which will kind of be where you want to be. And then if we start getting measurements outside the baseline, it'll help identify problems and point to solutions. So if on a certain day or a certain week, you're seeing a very high cost per ton, you're going to start looking at that process and what's going wrong, and allow you to more quickly address the problem than you might if you were just looking at the end cost per ton of one of your processes. Next slide. So one of the things that is helpful in being able to observe and interpret the data that you are gathering is a dashboard. This is just sort of a quick shot of one of the dashboards that we have created for one of our landfill customers. But this is kind of a quick shot that allows operators of MRFs or other operations to take a good look at the measurements that you're taking and their performance and how they kind of relate over a time scale to either your average or your set controls where you want to have your minimum and your maximum. Being able to identify measurements that are sort of outside the norms or outside of control like we said, will allow you to sort of pin down and take a look at where that's happening and address the problem. This is kind of where we jump into that continuous improvement where you're measuring, monitoring, and improving. And you want to be able to take a look at this over the long term, and having that data, recording it and having it and being able to access the majority of your data all together and create different measurements is something that's really beneficial. You want to be able to compare how your optical sorter is working now compared to how it was working 5 months, a year ago, or when you first installed it.
All right. Thank you, Jake. So as you can tell, Jake has a lot of logistics background. I mean, I think this is probably his Marine Corps experience, but he brings a lot of just common sense logistics to this. Something we were having a discussion, he and I, a couple weeks ago, and he made a comment that, you know, it's fine to have all these great new technical gadgets in your MRF, you know, fully illuminated, infrared, optical sorter, real-time separators. That's all great, but you need to step back to the basics and find out if you're actually achieving what it is you're trying to get. What are your goals? Most of the time, for us with a MRF, with any waste facility, it starts with a core assessment. That's an acronym that we created. It's actually a registered trademark of our company, and it stands for Comprehensive Operations Review. So we've talked about MRFs in this webinar, but we apply those same core processes to other types of diversion activities, not just inside a traditional MRF. Might be C&D diversion or a composting operation or curbside recycling or biomass production. The same concepts apply to any recycling diversion program that you might have. This takes us back to the last poll question that we have for the day, and it is, what is the most pressing issue you are dealing with right now? Number 1, meeting or increasing diversion goals. Number 2, making my MRF financially viable. Number 3, increasing efficiency and monitoring progress. Number 4, administrative, i.e. staffing or some other administrative task. Or number 5, facility improvements, retrofits, updates, things like that. So again, what is the most pressing issue you are dealing with right now? Number 1, meeting or increasing diversion goals. Number 2, making the MRF financially viable. Number 3, increasing efficiency and monitoring your progress. Number 4, administrative. Number 5, facility improvements.
Sounds good. So this is our very last poll question for the day. So if you haven't yet done a poll and you feel like you want to try it out, this is your chance. And I think that Neil clarified this, but basically you're just choosing the one that most relates to what you're dealing with, sort of at the top of your list right now. So some of these might not apply to everybody, but hopefully there'll be something that you're thinking about right now. I see a few questions have come in, so if you have a question or even a comment, if you want to share an observation or some experience that you've had on any of these topics, please feel free to do that. You can find the questions tab on your control panel, and you can just type that in and send it to me, and I will make sure that Neil gets to those at the end of the presentation. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close this out and share the results. So today we have 9% are focused on meeting or increasing diversion goals. 45% are wanting to make their MRFs more financially viable. 18% are focused on increasing efficiency and monitoring progress. Also 9% are looking at administrative issues, and 18% are looking at facility improvements or updates.
Okay, so that's quite a spread. Excuse me. You know, there are always administrative issues, and I think every manager will tell you that depending on the day or the week or what's going on, that administrative issues might be the top of our list. All managers recognize that. But that aside, the dominant factor here is trying to make our MRF financially viable. We're all feeling the pinch one way or the other. And so you may be looking at ways to increase efficiency or some facility improvements or updates or meeting diversion goals. But the biggest block of voting today is to make our MRF more financially viable. And that's what we see across the industry. We do work throughout North America. We've done some work overseas, and consistently we just see that in the recycling business, the number one metric is money. So if you're interested in what a core assessment is, you can contact us and we'll schedule a time to do a specific site-specific review of a core with you. And I want to talk about our no-risk guarantee. If we look at your operation, we'll ask a few questions. If we look at your operation and believe that we can save you money, we'll actually guarantee that core, that we'll come in and do a core assessment. And if we don't find and produce enough savings the first year to cover the entire cost of the core, we'll discount our fee. If we find zero financial benefits in a core assessment, we won't charge you a penny for it. We have done hundreds of core assessments for every type of waste facility out there. We have never, ever done a core assessment that didn't find many times more savings that first year than the cost of a core. It's all about drilling down and understanding the process, and that's how confident we are that we can do that. So if you're interested in a core, get a hold of us. Sarah, let's go ahead and do some questions and answers, and I'm going to jump to the next screen so there's some contact information while we're doing Q&A if folks want to just jot down a way to contact Jake or me.
Okay, sounds good. So the first question we have today, does the potential benefit of floor, hold on, let me just expand this out. Okay, does the potential benefit of floor sorting diminish with a dual stream system?
You bet. It can change. It depends on the demographics, but the thing is, a floor sort is not just to pull out cardboard. It's to pull out, maybe you pull out contamination. So regardless of what kind of dirty MRF, single stream, dual stream, regardless of what the feedstock is coming into your facility, if you're having problems making your numbers, I'm talking about diversion numbers or economic numbers, if you're having problems making your numbers through the MRF system, a floor sort should always at least be considered. Now, there are many different types of MRFs, many different types of recycling facilities, and also the demographics. We often find that regardless of whether single stream, dual stream, whatever that is, that certain loads that are going through certain neighborhoods and servicing certain types of structures, maybe multifamily, single family, low income, upper class, however that works, there are variations in that feedstock. And the floor sort can be the most effective location and the most economical point to get that out of there, to get either the bulk of certain types of commodities, i.e. cardboard, or to get contamination out of there. So absolutely, a floor sort should always be something that you consider. And as you go through evaluating step by step your process, you'll know whether a floor sort's going to help. But that should always be considered. And really, for a manager or a supervisor to just take time, take a couple hours, spend a half a day, bring some paperwork with you, but watch every load that's dumped on that floor, identify what you think about that load, and you can probably even visually determine whether a floor sort would make sense. Always at least consider it.
Okay, great. So the next question we have, how is the quality of the end product factored into the metrics?
Well, it's factored in by determining a couple ways. Evaluating the final commodity. Is that cardboard clean and uncontaminated? Is that plastic uncontaminated, or do you have clamshell plastic with your container, with your beverage containers? Looking at the quality of the feedstock is very critical, and that's always factored into it. If your MRF is running effectively, you should be directing a significant amount of material to the landfill. There's enough contamination in most feedstock streams that some of that should go to the landfill, and that's a problem that we've had. Is we've tried to minimize that in recent years to where we don't throw anything out to the landfill. We're recycling, quote unquote, the highest percentage, and we end up contaminating. That's one of the things that we're going to see coming up in the industry in the future, is that pristine commodities are going to be able to move on our market, and contaminated materials are not going to. So it's a very critical part of it, but really you're going to measure that on the back end as you start looking at what kind of materials you have, how clean it is, and you should see an increase in the amount of material going to the landfill. That's just a fact.
Okay, great. So another question we have, what are the most common problems you encounter while doing a core at a MRF?
Okay, well, that's a good question. There are a lot of those problems. The most significant one is something that our poll has identified for us, and that's that managers don't know the details of their operation. They don't know the flow rate and the production and the cost at each step in the process, and it was the most common response here today, and it's the most common response we see out there. Often we see that recycling operations managers, directors, whoever's in charge of these systems, maybe don't have clearly stated goals. Are we going for diversion? Are we minimizing costs? And if we're not clear, we don't know if we're successful or not because we don't have those goals. We also see from the kind of what Jake was talking about that we don't have good metrics or performance tracking. It's oftentimes the problem comes down to we just don't understand the flow. We've got all this amazing equipment, materials going through the system, but we haven't gained an understanding of the production and the cost of each step of the process.
All right, sounds good. That's the rest of our questions.
Great. Okay.
I will say, if you guys have questions that come up after today, please feel free to reach out to me or Neil or Jake. We're happy to follow up and get an answer to you or point you in the direction of an answer. So sometimes it may take a day or so for all the information to kind of simmer, and please let us know if questions come up after the webinar.
Well, thanks all for attending. Hope this was beneficial, and we see that there's a need for you to get out there and learn more about your flow and your process and your costs. And congratulations to the folks that are already doing that. So work safely and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.